So there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that people don't, realize. Like, oh, you just work like an hour a night or whatever. You're on stage telling jokes. It's like, no, you have to write those jokes. You got to listen to those sets, cut those clips. You're doing all the stuff.
It does take a lot of courage to quit your full-time 9 to 5 and get into stand-up or anything that's unconventional, because it also comes with a lot of uncertainty.
Don't quit your day job until you have to. Like, our culture, our society, we're so 9 to 5 driven. When you're not working, you almost feel bad. Because stand-up, it's like a gig economy, right? So there's no salary. You're being paid per event or per show. The club is more likely to look at you because they're thinking, this person has 10,000 people that follow them. They can probably sell more tickets than the guy who's got 500. Because that's currency now.
I do disagree with that a little bit. Followers can be brought, right? So my guest today is Vik Pandya, a nationally acclaimed stand-up comedian based in Chicago, known for his sharp self-deprecation, killer crowd work, and observational takes on dating. His debut comedy album, Friends with 401k Benefits, hit #1 on iTunes and landed in top 10 on Billboard. You have seen him on Dry Bar, OnlyFans TV, and live alongside comics like Trevor Wallace, Roy Wood, and Michelle Wolf. And he also recently started his podcast, The Business of Comedy. Welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. This is great.
Awesome. I would love for you to start with, how did you get into stand-up comedy? Because it is unconventional. I don't see a lot of people doing it. So what really pushed you to get into this career?
I never really saw it as like something you could just start doing, because when I grew up I would see comedy on, Netflix or like just like major TV networks like Comedy Central. I didn't really see like the starting level of comedy. And it's not until I went to college, I took an improv class, and I was like, oh, there's comedy you can take at like a junior level. And then that got me interested in trying to do an open mic. And I went to go see an open mic, and it was just at a bar in Chicago at Shuba's up north. And I was like, oh, this is just like random people trying this. So I was like, I should try it. And I went back a few months later, I tried it, and it went horribly, as it always does. And then I was like, oh, but this is like how you start. Like, that's how you can just start going to open mics, and you can go to one a week, you can go to one a day. Like in Chicago, we have 4 to 5 open mics a night. So you can really start to build it at your own pace. And so I started to do that. I started taking class at Second City, and I went through their whole improv program, and they have stand-up classes there, so I took those as well. So I kind of just started training as much as I could and getting on stage as much as I could, and then eventually I just started hitting mics and shows every day.
Oh, that's awesome. I know you did tell me that you were into finance and HR, and that was what you were doing before you went full-time into this. So was there like a key moment at that point of time that prompted you to finally make that transition?
Yeah, I mean, the advice I got was, don't quit your day job until you have to. So I've been doing stand-up 10 years about now, and I'm full-time as of like 2.5 years ago. So I was working full-time and doing stand-up full-time for about 8 years. So the reason you can do that is because stand-up is all at night, right? It's all shows, things like that. But once you start touring, once you start headlining, you have a lot of work during the day. You have to promote yourself. You have to do social media stuff. You have to email bookers. Like, that work gets done off stage. So there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that people don't, realize. Like, oh, you just work like an hour a night or whatever. You're on stage telling jokes. It's like, no, you have to write those jokes. You got to listen to those sets, cut those clips. You're doing all the stuff on your own. So that it got busy enough to a point where, I had to make a decision. Do I keep working 9 to 5 and trying to do this and being burnt out, or, just focusing fully on this, going all in? And I decided to do it. And I was able to support myself enough financially, because in addition to doing public shows, I do a lot of corporate and private shows. So those are like, a company will hire you to do their holiday party, or, you'll get hired by a guy to do a roast of his birthday or something. So I do a lot of those shows, which tend to be during the day as well. So between that and then the stand-up at night, I was able to be like, yeah, I want to be full-time. I can't really, like, I was getting to a point with my job, I just didn't care anymore. I was like sneaking out and stuff. And it made it a little easier working remotely, but then I was like barely, paying attention and didn't really give care at all. So I got to a point where I was like, I got to just do this and see where I go with it.
And when did you quit your job?
So right, basically like 2022, maybe like right after the pandemic. Yeah, there was a period where I was right before the pandemic. I was full time working, full time stand up, and then in Feb of 2020, I quit my job, that job, and I was like, I'm full time comedy, I'm doing it, and I was like, I have a full calendar of shows, and then March of 2020, the world shut down, and I was like, oh, now I have no shows, no job, and I just went from having two things that were extremely demanding and busy to having zero things. But that was actually great because it forced me to finally pause and take a step back and see what I want to do. Like, do I want to work? What do I want to do if I want to work? Do I want to just do stand up? How do I make that happen? And I, like a lot of people, I went back home during the pandemic, so my expenses were $0. I was staying with my parents, so I could actually do that and take that time away. And then I got a part-time remote job, and I continued that up until stuff started opening up again. And then eventually, I just quit that, and now I'm full-time comedy. But that was a way better work-life balance. It was part-time remote, making some money, and then doing stand-up as the world started to open up. And it was I took a I took a like a pay cut because I was like, I need to do something less demanding so I can focus on comedy. So sometimes you have to do that where you're like, it's not really. I have to go less in one area to go more in another, and so that was kind of like I had to put my ego aside. I was like a director at this company, and I was like, no, I'm going to be an individual contributor, and I did that, and it was great. I'm really glad I did it.
Well, that's awesome. And I'm glad you mentioned about pay cut because obviously there are certain positions that are really demanding and they pay more. But if you want to balance it and if you want to do something else and you don't see yourself doing that in the long run, then it's wise to make certain compromises and maybe go for a position.
And like, yeah, I think when you're like so go go go, I was 25 when I started comedy, and now 34. Like I don't have the energy I did to do all that. Like I'm way more. People ask me now, like, how do you do like 10 shows a week? I'm at these shows for like 20, 30 minutes. I'm doing my set and I go to the next one. I'm not like sitting when you start, you're at open mics. To get on stage for 3 minutes, you might be somewhere for 2 hours. So now I can do 3, 4 shows in 2 hours. So it's actually the time is the same, but I'm getting so much more done. But that's purely a function of being this point in my career.
Yeah, because you have worked so much now you are at a certain level where you can align things.
Correct. Yeah, I have a little more control over the schedule versus being like, I got to do whatever, And touring, I learned that last year. I was like just starting to tour pretty heavily and like 2 to 3 weekends a month, new city, new market. And I was just saying yes to kind of everything because when you start to tour, it's the same thing as you start to do comedy or open mics. It's like you kind of just do whatever people ask you to do. And now this year, I've tried to be a little more strategic, and I'm trying to be like, no, I'm going to go a few months on, a few months off, and not try to burn myself out. And it's like I want to be making money. A lot of these places you're just trying to get into the club, so you just do a one night situation there. You prove yourself, and they have you back for a full weekend next year or whatever. But you got to go there, prove you can deliver, sell tickets. So it's a lot more other things that are now involved in addition to just being funny.
And I would say it does take a lot of courage to quit your full-time 9 to 5 and get into stand-up or anything that's unconventional because it also comes with a lot of uncertainty, right? You don't always know exactly when your next show is going to be. Or it depends on a lot of other external factors as well. So I would love for you to talk more about some of the challenges that you faced, especially initially in your career.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is there's a guilt around like our culture, our society. We're so 9 to 5 driven. When you're not working, you almost feel bad. You're like, oh, I should be doing this, or I should be doing this, and a lot of times when I first became full time as a stand up, I would feel bad about, be like 10 o'clock on a Tuesday and I'd just be like at my house. And I was like, normally I'd be like in a meeting right now, answering emails. And now I'm just kind of like, I kind of do what I want. And it's a weird feeling because what I am doing though now is like I'm working, I'm writing, I'm doing other things, but you don't have the same kind of structure as someone. There's no boss telling you what to do, so you have to decide how to structure your day, and that kind of freedom is you need a lot of discipline, which you learn and you figure that out. But for a while, it was an obstacle of like, how do I structure my day? How do I? Because I was so used to, I'm such a regimented, schedule oriented person that I was used to someone else kind of providing that, and then I had to kind of set that for myself, after. And I was able to do it because I like that sort of thing, but it took me a little bit of an adjustment. And there's still days I feel guilty. Like today, I'm technically off, but I'm just doing podcasts. I'm like doing life stuff, and then I pick back up tomorrow with shows like pretty heavy. So it's just a weird, like, your weekend might be a Tuesday or a Wednesday versus someone else is like, oh, I'm taking my day of rest on Saturday, Sunday, but that's not how our industry works. So you just have to kind of like zoom out and look at things that way. So that was like kind of one big challenge, and then obviously monetarily, going from a six-figure salary to not that was quite the adjustment. I mean, I grew up like, I like nice things. I'm a bougie guy, so I was like, I have to find a way to make enough money to kind of not fully change my lifestyle, obviously change it reasonably, but there was a period of like maybe a year right after where I had to kind of like draw down a little bit. And now I'm just like a little smarter about what I do and trying to like, my living situation. I was like, I have a place, I'm renting it out. So I'm trying to make income other ways. That way it's not just so much pressure on just like stand up.
Right. So you have other ways of making some amount of money. Like I would call it like passive income.
Correct. Yeah, you want some sort, because stand up is it's like a gig economy, right? So there's no salary. You're being paid per event or per show versus, a 2-week paycheck, which you just get used to. You work in corporate for 10, 15 years. You're like, oh, I'm just used to getting paid on this day, this time, this amount. And that's how you structure your bills, your everything. But in stand up, you may have a year where in January and February you make this much money, and then in December you make like 4 times as much. So it's not as consistent. So you have to kind of budget for longer periods of time, and that was definitely an adjustment. But in a way, it's nice because it kind of tricks you. You get paid like a lump sum amount sometimes, or a lot of times, and you'll think you're rich. You're like, oh, I just got $1,000 for the show, but that if you spend it, you're like, there's nothing going to my account. So you have to make sure you. And I came from finance, so I understand this, but so many times you just get cash in hand at a show, and you're like, well, I'm gonna go spend this. It's free money, and you're like, no, that's not how that works. You gotta put that away. So it's a little bit sometimes kind of mess with your head, but. Now that I've been doing it long enough, I'm like, no, there's a lot of money that I just go Venmo me or direct deposit it, so I don't see it, I don't touch it. Because if you just give it to me in cash, I'm going to spend it.
I think that's most of us.
Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned about managing money, because I've seen a lot of people, people that I talk to who are actors or they're in stand-up comedy, they end up spending all the money, right? They don't have the proper way to manage their finances and like just manage their money overall. And I think that's one big mistake that a lot of new actors or comedians make. So I just want us to kind of go back to your initial days and talk more about some of the mistakes that you made at that point of time.
Yeah. I mean, I got the first place I rented, after my job was something that I could afford with my full-time salary. I could not afford with my comedy salary at the time. So, but I was like, yeah, it'll be 12 months. I'll just sign the lease and it's fine. And then after like 2 months, you're like, oh, this is not going to go well. Like you realize, now I'm stuck in this for 10 more months. So it was a hard lesson to learn because I paid for something I couldn't afford. But with the rental versus a buying situation, you're renting, so you're like, oh, I'll just have to come up with it for this month, and you kind of start to think of it more micro versus what you should think about is more macro, where you're like, how much money is it per the year? Am I going to make that much money per the year? And so then I started to change how I looked at it, and it was a lesson I had to learn the hard way. I was like, no, I didn't. That was not correct. So the next place I'm gonna get is going to be way more within my means. And I got to like use that and kind of have the spoils of that, but it wasn't worth the stress of coming up with that money. And it's also like I think a lot of my parents were good about like instilling in me like you got to save, you got to do this, and so coming from finance too, I'm like I know the value of putting money away, so I try to save a little bit or try to have things that just like go out of my account and go into another place, so it's like an investment. So I try to have a couple of things where I'm like, even if I don't do anything actively, passively things are happening. So I feel like I'm, and so I keep those up. That's like the one thing I've done right is keep that stuff going. But basically, do it. Yeah, don't like over. You don't want to be house poor. You don't want to be buying things you can't afford. I did a little bit of that early on. I bought like a car and a place that I couldn't necessarily afford. And now it's like normalized, but for a year or so I was like, oh, this is a big mistake, buying both of these things. But now it's okay, and it's not. It's something that you just like I said, it's the way to get paid is so different. When you're getting paid a salary, you just like you're good. Yeah, my $2,000 coming in this point, but in comedy, you're like, oh, I might not get that for 4 weeks instead of 2 weeks. So everything kind of changes in terms of that. So just learning how to spread your money versus spend it all at once was a big challenge.
Well, that makes sense. And I would love for you to talk more about how did the industry change since the time that you started. And now, I mean, there have been a lot of differences. I mean, we saw the whole pandemic, which changed the world in a lot of ways. So did this industry changed as well? Like, I'm not sure if there are online stand-up comedy shows.
Yeah, well, there's online comedians, in the sense people who blew up online. I mean, that's most comics now in a way. So what happened is the pre-pandemic, comics weren't posting their material on social media. You would share your material with bookers via like privately. So if I wanted to get booked at Zanies, I would send the Zanies people a tape of me doing stand-up, along with references, along with my credits, and that's how you used to get booked. Now, people will send that, but they'll also share that content on their social media. They'll share short clips of them doing stand-up. They'll share their followers and views and likes because that's currency now. So if you have 10,000 followers on Instagram versus 500, the club is more likely to look at you because they're thinking, this person has 10,000 people that follow them. They can probably sell more tickets than the guy who's got 500. So it's now less about being purely funny and more about can you move tickets.
But so this is my opinion. I do disagree with that a little bit. Because followers can be brought, right? As well.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So the problem is a lot of what happens is these guys who blow up on like TikTok. Say you're like a just a funny sketch person. You make front facing content on TikTok or Instagram, and you get asked. You're like you can sell or move tickets. You go to a club. Say they'll give you like a Tuesday, and they're like, hey, how many tickets can you move? And now you're supposed to do an hour of stand up. You've never done stand up, and to do an hour takes a very long time to get good enough. So you don't do well in the show. You may sell the tickets, but then the club is like, well, we're not going to have you back because the show was bad. People were upset. So you get, I heard a funny quote. Someone's like, all these TikTok people, all these social media people, they sell out once because the next time all those people are like, we're not going to go back. That was a bad show. Like, stick to doing your online content. So in a way, I'm grateful for when I started because it was just about being funny and just about getting good. And now I'm like learning the social media side of it myself. But I'm also like envious of, I wish I started posting earlier because if I posted during the pandemic, like, Nimesh Patel posted during the pandemic, he started posting on TikTok. That was when the algorithm didn't have a lot of stand-up and it took off. But it took off with stuff he was already proficient at. So it just spread awareness of his comedy. And then, when he started doing stand-up across the country, people started buying more tickets because they knew who he was. So in that case, it's like social media is great. But if you're someone who doesn't do the same thing you do on stage, then it can have a discrepancy. But now that's something that's totally changed. Just like how to move tickets, how to market yourself. It used to just be like word of mouth, referrals, that sort of thing. Mostly your talent, but now it's a little bit. Talent is obviously still important because it keeps the product going, and you need to have talent like to be able to sustain that. But you also could just get lucky. Your look could be the thing that they like right now, or the industry is now just deciding they're trying to take bets on who's going to blow up. The industry used to make people. Like it used to be like, oh, we see the talent in this person. Let's now put resources around them to blow them up. Now the industry is more so looking at people who are already kind of blowing up, and then they're like, now we want to ride on their coattails. So that's a little bit of that's a pretty big shift actually from when I started.
Yeah, and it's one thing making content for social media. Obviously, it's probably a minute, 2 minute long content, or even like few seconds, and you have retakes that you can do. But when you're on stage, you cannot do any retakes. You just have one opportunity to do what you have to do, and either it goes well or it does not.
Yes.
So I think that approach is a little flawed, but I see where you're coming from, because even in the acting industry, now it's more about how many followers you have.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate because, like you mentioned, not only can you buy followers, but you can also get followers for things that are not your talent, right? Like
Right.
if I go to a club and I get laughs, that's directly because I'm being funny. Versus if on social media, if I post a picture of me on vacation, people like the beach, they're going to like the photo. Not necessarily like me or my humor. It's just like, this is a cool photo. So you don't get the same one-to-one, is if that makes sense. So that's the problem, is people think they're a certain level because of the number of followers, but then you put them on stage. Like I know that's why Chicago is so great. We have so many great comedians here that you've never heard of. You have so many comics who are just bad at social media, who
Exactly.
I would put these comics up. Like I'd put open micers in Chicago up against, feature headliner comics in like other parts of this country. So it's just funny that some people are just purists. They don't care. They're like, no, I just want to be funny. And now that I've started headlining and touring, I'm like, I understand that, that there is a whole nother side of this that you need to get good at, and that's the social media piece. But I still believe like pretty strongly in the talent and making sure that's like what I lead with.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, that some people are just not good with making.
Sure, yeah, there's not their thing.
They just don't have that much time to do it. They would rather choose to invest that time in enhancing their craft.
Exactly. And that shouldn't be like frowned upon. It's unfortunately, until you get to a certain level in your career, you can't afford to hire a social media expert or social media person on your team. You have to do all that stuff. And that's the problem with these like hustle 9 to 5 or like, careers that we're all trying to do, these side hustles. You have to do everything until you don't. And so, like I said, I've been doing this 10 years. I've slowly started outsourcing different parts of it. So now for clips, I have a guy who edits my clips and sends them to me. So I send him a 45-minute set. He sends me back 10 clips. I approve them and I post them. So it saves me the time of like cutting and editing. That takes a ton of time. And he's just his skill set. Let people who are experts do their thing. Like I don't want to be combing through footage and doing that. I'll be like, hey, I remember this funny moment here. Make sure you get that, and then he'll do it, and then we'll go back and forth a little bit. But that's way more efficient than me trying to do that. So I have him. I have someone who helps me do like video, like my podcast. I have a guy who does the audio. So you start to like build people and then expertise around you. But when you start, you can't just like invest in that stuff. You have no money and you have no resources. You have to establish yourself first before you can bring other people on.
Well, that's a great point. And actually, I was listening to your podcast and I loved what the guest mentioned. He said that don't really attach yourself to the outcome of the show.
Yes.
Like whether your show goes super well or it just goes down the drain. You should never be attached to the outcome, because then either the success is going to get into your head or you'll be very bogged down by the pressure or the failure, right? And I love that, because I think that's what a lot of new comedians and actors do. They take themselves really seriously, and then when the next show or the next gig does not go as well as they expect, then that does affect them negatively. So like, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough in this business because see, in a 9 to 5 job, you show up every day. You have, say you're an accountant, right? You go and you do your accounting job. No one at your accounting job is looking at you like you don't know how to do accounting. Like you just forgot it one day. When you do stand up, every show you're kind of
Eyes are on you.
reproving yourself every time you're on stage because you're going to a new audience, new people. So you go into a new environment every night, and those people don't know you, or maybe some do, maybe some don't. But if you're just doing like a showcase where you're with a bunch of comedians and no one's really advertised, the audience doesn't know who you are. So they're just like, who is this guy? So you have to in your 10 to 15 minutes on stage, you have to establish who you are, establish your expertise, and show the audience, convince a bunch of strangers that you're proficient at your job. And that pressure is, if you go into work every day, you're not convincing your boss that you do your job. You know, they know who you are. So people don't understand that kind of element. That's why the phrase "you're only as good as your last show" is like, we all kind of live by that, because you can't get too comfortable until you're at a level of success of like a Kevin Hart, a Bill Burr, these people who are like, have anyone would recognize them. You're still in a moment, and even those people, you only get a grace of like, the grace in comedy is so short. Like you hear about all the time, like famous people will pop into the Comedy Cellar, and maybe they're not a stand-up, but they're like an actor trying comedy. They'll get like, the audience who knows them will be like, oh, we recognize this person from that show. We'll give them like a minute on stage or so, and then after a minute, if you're not funny, now it's back to just stand-up is the great equalizer. It doesn't matter if you were cool in a TV show. No one cares if you're not funny. So in that context. So that's what I love about stand-up, because it kind of humbles you constantly. You can't get too comfortable, because even at that level, you're still kind of like at risk of bombing, you know? So but that's also frustrating, because you tie your value to the art, but really to be above it is the best in both the directions, like you said. Because if I have a great show, I feel really good, and I'm ready to I want to ride that high. But like, that's also not a great ethos to live in, because then I'm just chasing that every time. Versus, I'm trying to tie it more to, did I say what I wanted to say on stage? Did I work on these new jokes? Did I work on that skill I was trying to enhance, or that thing, or that specific part of the craft? And that's when I take value in. And then I know if I have a good show or a bad show, it all will level out in the end, and I'm ultimately better than I was the day before. And so that's how I try to value myself. And I've gotten good about it, where I don't look at other people really anymore. I don't look at like, oh, what's this person doing? Like, I should be doing that. I'm more like, what am I doing? And I only try to compete against myself. Because otherwise, that's another thing when you start in this business, you're around everyone all trying to do the same thing. So it's like, if you go to your job again and there's 4 new people every day and they're all trying to get your job. That's what it feels like. But you have to look at it like, that's not really true. Everyone has a lane. But in stand-up, it's like everyone's trying to sign up for the same mic. So you do feel this, like, there's a enhanced pressure. But again, you have to understand, first of all, no one cares. Nothing matters and nobody cares. That's the quote that's also pretty relevant in my mind all the time. Like, you're the only one thinking about all this stuff.
No one cares about others much.
No, as much as you, and that's good in a way. You have to detach yourself a little bit from that. So yeah, it's hard. It's a constant kind of reaffirming, rechecking, but like, you have to be okay with that, because some days you're going to be the best in the show, some days you're going to be the worst. It's just sometimes not in your control entirely, and you're also human. It's okay to be. You learn from when you're bad. So that's another thing in stand-up, especially. You learn when you take risks, when you try things. If you're just doing well all the time. I mean, I know so many guys. A comic yesterday told me, he's like, I really respect that you do new stuff almost every week at a show I run, because he's like, I'm nervous to do that. He's like, I get nervous on that to do it, because I want to, especially if the audience is kind of tight or tough. He's like, then I default into my tried and true material, but then he's not working on the stuff that he wants to work on. And for me, I'm trying to get to a point where I'm like, I don't care. I'll do what I'm going to do. And if you're on board or not. You know, it's like one of those things where you have to kind of have that confidence, but it takes a long time. And even me, there's days I have where I'm like, I'm not as confident, but I try to get to a place where I'm like, I'm going to do these jokes no matter what. And that way I can feel like I was productive, and I'm not measured by the show, I'm measured by what I did today.
No, absolutely. And I would like to say one thing, that nowadays people's attention span it's really limited, right? They have a lot of options, a lot of content. There's a lot to do, and that's something that we have noticed. Like, a while back, when people would put long form YouTube videos, they would work extremely well. But now you see the reels that are like 30, 20, 25 seconds work. Yeah, so I mean, in a way it's also good because no one really, like, if the show or if the video did not go as well as you anticipated, then people won't remember. Like, I think they have uh, sure, they'll you'll see the comments, they'll judge you, but they'll move on.
Yeah.
So I think it's also important for the artist to move on.
It's another thing that's like a double-edged sword, right? Like, you're not as memorable. It's harder to be memorable now, but also that allows you some room to kind of fail and try, because no one's going to remember in 10 minutes or whatever. That's why when you're on a show with like 10 comics, if you do kind of okay, but if you had a couple funny moments, people aren't going to be like, they're not going to come up to you and be like, "Wow, you were terrible." Like, they're going to be like, "Oh, you had, like, you were good, you were okay." But it's one of those things where you're like, "Well, also, how do I stand out then?" It's like you got to really be killing then in that situation, right? So it goes both ways. But to your point, yeah, everyone has a limited attention span, and so you're the one who's going to take that home with you and be like, "Oh my God, that one thing I messed up that line." No one in the audience is like, they don't even know, like. They got their own stuff. They're coming in. That's why you have to realize too. Sometimes you think it's you, but you don't have any idea what the people coming into the show, what they're dealing with, what their life is like. Maybe their day was long. Maybe they're drunk. Maybe they just had a breakup. Like, you don't know all these things. So when you think about that, you're trying to please people you've never met, who may not understand your comedy, who may be a different intelligence level, who may be a different socioeconomic level. There's so many factors, and that's why it takes so long to get good at stand-up, because you have to make craft material that kind of works across the board until you get big enough where you have a niche audience. But that takes a very long time to get either of those, usually.
But how do you cater to this audience? Because you don't know who to expect, like you mentioned, right? People from different backgrounds, cultures are coming in. It's difficult to kind of get a sense of what exactly they would like. So when you work or when you're writing content for your shows, do you keep in mind who your audience is going to be? And if yes, like, how do you navigate through those complexities?
That's also a thing where we talk about it. We call it pandering, right? Is the word of, and it's a negative term because you don't want to pander, which means you're not really saying what you want to say, but you're pandering to do well in the circumstance. Now, there's a different, like, lighter term, which is just, I call pivoting. So say I'm doing a show in Chicago, pretty liberal, younger people, diverse crowd. I don't need to change my set. I'm going to do the jokes I want to do because they're most likely going to get my POV. Even if they don't necessarily agree with me, they have heard enough perspectives and they're young enough to understand my references. Now, say I go do a show in southern, like, Mississippi or something, in a small town, and I may be the first comic they've seen in 6 months. I'm in this town. They all know each other. No one knows me. I will not pander, but what I'll do is I'll pivot, in the sense I want maybe open the same as I open in Chicago. I'll try to do some jokes that I think are more like down the middle of the road jokes to get them on my side, and then I'll transition into what I want to say, or the jokes that maybe I'm like was nervous to say at the start. So that I don't think is pandering as much as it is just being a good performer, is adapting, is changing to your audience. But I'm not changing the material, I'm just changing where I put it. And I think that is the distinction, that as I've done this longer, you can still do your material. Like, I was just in Phoenix last weekend, and totally different, older kind of conservative crowd for half the shows, but I didn't change any of my material. I was like, and at some level you have to be like, you're coming to see me, you kind of knew what you signed up for. It's not my problem if you don't like it. You could have watched a video, you could have researched me a little bit. If you didn't, it's a little bit on you. But I also want to do well. I want the audience to like me. I want the shows to go well. So I will, I will maybe explain some things a little bit more, or I'll get into some things a little bit differently, and that's okay. That's what's cool about comedy, is it's adaptive, it's iterative. Stand-up is boring if it's the exact same thing night over night. That's what keeps me engaged, is I never know what the audience is going to be. But you also use context clues. Like, I watch the openers set. Maybe I'll see a little bit of the show before me to see what's kind of working, what's kind of not, what the audience likes, what they don't. And then I'll use that to kind of change my set. So it depends where you are in the show as well. You get some additional data points. to help inform your set. But a lot of times, like, I go to get to a show, I haven't seen anything before me because I'm getting there late from another show, and I just got to go up and figure that out on the fly. And that's also the longer you do it, the better you get at reading that and being able to pivot in the moment.
No, that's true. I mean, the more you're up there, the better you'll get, right?
100%, yeah.
I would love for you to talk about, some of the, like, if someone wants to get into this full time, and they don't have a lot of resources, right? What is the best way to get started?
Well, the good thing is comedy, unlike a lot of different endeavors or pursuits, is you don't need to pay anything to start. There's open mics, which in Chicago are free. You just go online, you look at like Chicago open mics. If you just Google that, there's also like a couple Facebook groups called Chicago Comedy. There's an Instagram page called Chicago Open Mics, and literally there's a spreadsheet, and it lists all the different open mics by day, location, how to sign up, and you just show up, you put your name in, you sign up, and then you go up and you do 3 to 5 minutes of stand up, and it runs. There's a host, but there's no one being like, you don't get paid for that. They don't take any money from you. The bar usually is like, sometimes there's a drink minimum, but usually there's not. So literally it's $0 to try. That's why you see a lot of like people will get like dared. They're like, oh, you gotta do stand up. If you're a fantasy football league, you lose or whatever, the punishment is to go do stand up for 3 minutes. So sometimes at open mic you'll see like 20 bros who just like are there because their friend lost and then they have to try it. So the way to start is to just get on stage, and there's plenty of opportunities to do that, and there's endless resources online about like open mics, like how to do that, and also going to just watch an open mic is really helpful because you get to see how it works and you get to see what the flow is, and it kind of demystifies it a little bit, because when I went to my first open mic, I had never seen that amateur level of comedy. I'd only seen like George Carlin. I'd never only seen like huge comics specials. And then I went to this bar on like a Tuesday at 10 p.m. and there was just 20 people in there trying to make each other laugh. I was like, oh, this is so much less prestigious, but also so much less like pressure, because it's just like, it was just everyone just trying. And it wasn't, not everyone's doing badly. So you kind of get this, I had a sense of comfort. I was like, oh, like we're all bad. That's why we're here. We're trying to get better. And then I ended up getting up and doing worse somehow than everyone because I was so new. But you get to learn, like, that's how it starts. And so if you're trying to get into it, just look up open mics in your area and just go. And you don't necessarily perform the first time. Go and watch. Talk to other newer comics. That's another thing. This is like very passed down information. So people more senior to you will tell you stuff or be like, hey, here's a thing to go to. Here's a mic you could check out. Here's some shows that are more catering to newer comics. So you also learn in terms of shows. Some shows are very like easy to get on. Some shows are harder to get on. Clubs are the same way. And you start to kind of figure all that stuff out as you do it. But base level, try to write something every day, or write a little bit every day and get on stage.
I'm the kind of person, I believe that if you want to do something, you can always learn it.
Yeah.
And you can always get better at it. But with comedy, I do believe that it is actually really, really tough. And some people are they just have great sense of humor. And that does help a lot. And some people don't. So do you actually believe in that? Like, do you need that innate talent within yourself to actually do well in this career? Because I see your point. Like, there are so many opportunities. You can get started, you can get on a stage and then see where you are and then go from there. But then the actual success, right, that comes when you're actually really good at what you do.
Yeah.
So what's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is some people who just have innate talent, but ultimately, until you discipline that and you are able to, your work ethic kind of matches that, because talent will only take you so far. You still need to have all these other elements that are like the behind the scenes stuff, like I mentioned. And that's why there's some people who go the other way. They have very little talent, but they're very good at these other things. They'll get potentially further sometimes, or even surpass you, because you may have more talent, you may be funnier, but you don't have the other things that you need to succeed. You don't have the discipline. So there's a lot of people I know, again, like, that are so funny, but they just like are lazy. They don't want to work. and you feel bad because you're like, well, I can help you only so far. You have to help yourself. So there is this innate though. There's some people I see, they're new, they're like a month into comedy. I see them on stage, and that's why as a senior comedian, it's important to tell those people like, hey, I see something in you. That was really good. You got to keep doing this because that will keep that person going for 6 months potentially. And I mean, when I was started, there's a couple people like more senior to me, and some opportunities I had like to open for Roywood Jr. And he told me, he's like, oh, that was like, he was talking about my jokes. He said that was really good. Someone like that level telling you you're funny, it carried me for years, you know, and I still stay in touch with him. So yeah, you gotta have talent is helpful, but there's also people who will just rote repetition will like figure it out. But obviously there is an innate like charisma and innate kind of ability. But until you know how to channel that and use it, it doesn't matter. No one's gonna care or see it.
And correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I think it's also really important to know your USP, like what do you actually bring to the table, right? Because there has to be something unique about you, and maybe that comes from your identity, right? Like in your case, you're a South Asian, so maybe some of the jokes or the content you make, and correct me if I'm wrong, but must have also had a role and must also be connected with your identity and your roots. So, how important do you think is it to be connected to your roots? Like, how big of a part does that play?
I think it could be roots. It could also be kind of what you said is what is the thing that sets you apart. And roots is one example, right? Another example could be you have a really great ability to tell really dark jokes. So that's a niche kind of piece of comedy where certain people can't do that. Like I have a couple dark jokes, but it's not my like forte. I don't like to sit in that, you know. But I think my niche is like I kind of you can tell I'm on the right side of things, but like it may seem like I'm not until it kind of reveals itself. So I like to play kind of the line pretty well. And I think that's kind of my niche. But it takes a long time to discover that. You may not know that as soon as you start, especially in comedy. It took me, you know, they say it takes 10 years to kind of find your voice in comedy, which is also kind of crazy that you're just doing this thing that you're like, yeah, you're 10, I'll figure it out. But as I'm now 10 years in, I kind of believe that. I mean, for me, I think it started really clicking a couple years ago. But I think that's just because I've done so much comedy. Like I maybe enhanced that, but it is something that's just time. Like it's just time, material, and failing a lot. And I think until you kind of go through that, because you also may think your identity is one thing or your thing that sets you apart, and then as you go further and further, you're like, oh, actually, that's just one element of what I thought. It's actually this. So for me, when I started, I thought I was just like this. I was like a finance bro. I was like, all my material is very kind of in that vein, and I thought that was my thing. And then as I, you know, started doing it, then I'm like, oh, actually being like randomly silly, vulnerable, self-deprecating, while still being kind of like cocky. It's like a very fine kind of mixture, and that's actually my thing. But that's like a much more nuanced version of that first thing. But it took me years of developing and trying and figuring it out to get there. Otherwise, I would have just, if I just never evolved and I stayed and be like, no, that's my thing. I'm this like, you know, this alpha male bro. That's not appealing. It's also not true. It's just simply not true. So it also has to be true to you, and that evolves. Like my material changes every year, every month, every day because I change. My life changes. My circumstances change. So the longer you do comedy, the faster your comedy is able to match your life. Because when you're new, you write a joke and you kind of don't know how to write a new joke or like how to refine that. It takes a long time. So you might be doing the same set for a year or 6 months. Now, if something happens in my life, I can write it. I can talk about it that night on stage. It may not go great, but I can at least get something out. So I can very quickly adapt myself and my material versus when I was new, my identity may not have been as caught up to where I am now because I simply didn't have the skill set to, talk about it on stage.
No, I love that, and I think it like you mentioned, it's important to evolve with time because times are changing, people are changing,
Exactly.
there are
Yeah.
likes, dislikes. So it's important to stay up with the trends while also knowing what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, and that comes with practice, right? That comes with constantly being there and just trying new things. And I think that connects well with the fact that do not be attached to the outcome, because if it does not go well, well, you have another chance to
Yeah.
prove yourself and to do something else. I also liked when you mentioned that maybe there's something that happens in your life at that point of time, and then you can talk about it in the show, right? So it's a good way to also express what you're going through.
Yeah, that's why the kind of analogy, and it's a little hack at this point, but everyone comics are like, oh well, I can't afford therapy, so I do this. So that's like, and there's an element of that that's quite true though, because a lot of people, you go to work, you work, you come home, you maybe have a relationship, a partner, a family. There's not really anyone in that you can vent to that's not immediately affected, if that makes sense. Like if say you have a problem with your spouse, you can't go and complain to your spouse about that. They're like, what do you, yeah, that's not the same as venting to a therapist or to an external party. Stand up, if something goes wrong in my life or I'm complaining about something, that can be used for humor, which a lot of humor is conflict obstacles, right? No, humor is not funny if I'm like, oh, I had a great day with my girlfriend, everything's great. That's not funny. No one's like, yeah, well, what's the conflict? What are you? People relate to obstacles, right? They like want to know what you're going through. I'm probably going through something similar, or have, or will. So why is it funny? It's because we all going through this stuff together, and being relatable is number one. So that element of like people make that analogy, it's very true because you get to kind of have that release. Like I've had it before for shows where like I did a show and I'm going to another show and I'll talk about the previous show at the second show because I'm like, oh, that was so weird. Like, or it's like a different demographic. I did like a country club last week and then I went to this like urban show on the south side. I mean, it went from like really conservative old white people with a ton of money to like basically like a rap battle was before me at this other show. So it's like completely different. But like I was able to talk about that in a funny way to them, and they liked it because they're like they understood like how I'm like, well, this is pretty jarring for me because I just came from this. So I was kind of filling them in on how like in real time what I was feeling and what I was going through, and it settled me too because then they laughed and they're like, I'm like, oh yeah, they understand why that would be weird. And it wasn't necessarily a great joke, but it was just like me kind of riffing at the top about how crazy this job is, like how weird switching your material. Sometimes you have to go clean on a show, which means you don't swear, you don't talk about anything controversial. And then the second show you might do might be the dirty show at the Laugh Factory, where you're doing all your dirtiest stuff. And that could be the same night. You could be doing comedy two different ways, totally different audiences, totally different set, but that's your job. You have to pivot, like going back to pivot. Correct. Yeah. And going back to the ultimate thing, that's why you can't get too attached to the either outcome because they're very different circumstances. So maybe you don't do well at the first show, but the second show you do well, and that's a net. It evens out. Everything is equal at the end of the day.
Right, and to that, I'll also say that what many people or what the audience does not see is the amount of work that it takes to get ready. It's not just showing up and doing it. There's a lot of research you have to do. There are a lot of you have to write a lot of things, right? You just can't show up and do it. There's a lot of work that goes in the background. So like, how do you approach your research process, and how do you actually approach writing new material?
Yeah, I mean that's also evolved over time. So a lot of my jokes some of them are like if it's topical stuff, you want to make sure you have the facts right because if you're doing stuff about the news or about a political figure or about a country or about a stat, that needs to be accurate because otherwise someone's going to call you on it in the crowd. And that's also embarrassing because you look stupid, but also it can be good if you know the stats because then you look smart and you can kind of refute that person. So that goes both ways. But so a lot of this stuff, what I do is like I try to free write. I call it like some people call it morning minutes, morning pages. Some point in the day, ideally in the morning, I try to write like 10 minutes of just whatever. That doesn't mean I'm like, there's no point. It's just like a journal, honestly. I just kind of put my thoughts down. I rant. I just nonsense. Just like, it's a lot. That's a little bit of therapy too, because you're like, it's almost like how you're feeling. So it is very much like a diary journal situation. You might in that write a bit. You might have an idea come up that's funny, but more often than not, it's just to kind of get the juices flowing. So I usually start there, and then I also try to read a couple articles from the news. So usually New York Times is what I like to read. I'll read two random articles, usually non-political. I try to go stuff that's just like I look at the political headlines so I know what's going on, but I try to read stuff that's like not in my world at all. I might read on like the future of AI. I might read on new renewable energy things, just like random stuff, just to be informed on something that is kind of niche, but it also kind of expands my worldview. So I try to read a couple articles a day too. And then I used to be better about this. I used to also read like a book, like a 10, 20 minutes of an actual book of something, some random, maybe nonfiction. I'm listening to an audiobook right now, so I try to do that as well. But those are like my three activities around, 2 to 3 activities around how I get in the mindset to write. And then I kind of look at my notes app, and throughout the day, today, tomorrow, anytime I see something or I hear something that I think could be funny, or that's an idea, like a kernel of an idea, I'll put it in my notes app on my phone. And then when I sit down to write, I'll look through those notes and I'll start to add stuff to them. So it's a lot of information gathering is what I call it, like just being observational, listening and hearing things, or being in a conversation and picking up on something that I'm like, oh, that's a funny idea. Let me write that down. So I write everything down. And when you're new, that's an important thing to do, is things that you don't even think, like you're like, maybe just write it down, because you're gonna forget it. And a lot of ideas come when you're not doing the thing. So if you're in the shower, that's like, ideas come to you. If you're walking or you're working out. So I always have my notebook or my phone nearby so I can write that down. Then when I go after doing those activities, I will look through that stuff and try to add. And then I also go back and look at old stuff, and I also listen to sets. That also helps me, because listening to sets is very important, because you might write something that day and you might say it a different way on stage, and maybe the way you said it on stage is actually better than how you wrote it, because those are two different things. So you have to go listen, and I am very loose on stage. So I write something, but I don't really say it verbatim on stage. So I like to let it happen on stage naturally. The more I say it, I'll get it to where I want it. But I'll do that like 5 or 6 times, and then I'll listen to that and write that down. Now I'm like, now that's the way to say it. But it takes like an iterative process. So that's how I do it. I also go on stage sometimes with just like a concept or an idea and just riff on it, and that's called writing on stage. And that's only when I've had the audience, like I'm pretty comfortable with them and they know I've already proven myself. Like if I'm doing a 45-minute set, after about 30 minutes of good jokes, I'll be like, do you guys want to hear some new stuff? And I'll get the buy-in from the audience, and I'll be like, okay, here's like 5 new ideas I'm working on, and I'll just like riff on them, and the audience will tell me it's good or tell me it's bad, and by their laughter, right? And so a lot of them are just like real short, like really one line, and then I'll start to build those out, that way. So I do all that sort of stuff, depending on the situation, depending on the show. But like on a day like today where I don't have a show, I will now go back. I have to listen to a bunch of sets, and I will write and just like kind of sit in front of all my notes and start to stare at them, honestly, until I finally start to see pieces. Because a lot of the other stuff is just happening on the fly as well.
Right, and like you mentioned that there's this much prep that you can do, but at the end of the day, it's about when you get to the stage, what you're doing.
Yeah, and also like that can change. That's what's kind of frustrating sometimes. Is like, sometimes you have this idea. You're like, I got this great new joke I want to work on, and you get to the show, and the show is going really poorly, and you have to, if you want to have a good set, you might have to do these 4 jokes that will help the show and help the room, but the cost is you don't get to do the thing you wanted to work on. And that's, again, a part of this job is ultimately, we're entertainers. We're trying to make the show good. So do I want to have a good set, or do I want to have work on the thing I want to work on? A lot of times you can have both. You can overlap those two, but a lot of times you also have to just do what the show needs. And that could be the position you are in the show. If you're the host, the show's not about you. The show is about, you're the host. You're setting up everyone else on the show. So you have to take yourself out of it and be like, how do I be the best host? How do I hype the crowd up? How do I make sure that everyone is situated? All the announcements are made. Make sure if people get up to go to the bathroom, I don't just bring the next comic up. I have to kill time while that person's like, while half the audience is gone. So you kind of have to adapt to the show. But the longer you do it and the more shows you do, you'll have enough opportunities to work on your stuff and get there.
I like that, and I would also like to know that what is your strategy for refining a joke that is not landing? Like, do you just, because you don't have an option, you can't go back and plan something on the spot.
A lot of times, the longer you do it, you kind of get a sense for, if it doesn't work, you kind of know right as you do it why it didn't work, almost, or at least you have an inkling. Like, it could be all those factors I described. Maybe you're first, maybe it's too early. Because a lot of times you're working on new jokes that are like, say you're working on a joke that's like a dirtier joke, and you're the first comic the audience has seen, and you do the joke as your first joke. Like, that's too much. The audience is not warmed up yet. They don't know who you are. Now you're just coming out sounding crazy because you just are doing this new. Conversely, if you're at the end of the show and they had already seen an hour of comedy, you are doing well for 10 minutes. Your last joke is a dirty joke. That could completely change how it's received. So you have to kind of understand when you're telling something all these factors in the background, because that can affect how it is. But regardless of that, you hear how the audience responds, and you can also see people sometimes, like, depending on what the show is, and you kind of see like, oh, that part was getting some laughter, or that part was doing well, but then this is where it kind of fell off. And it could be, did they not understand it? Was the punchline not clear because the setup wasn't clear? So a lot of times you try to, I call it breaking the joke. So you try to take out stuff from the setup to make the punchline still work. So a lot of times you write something, you have all this great setup, and then you have the punchline here, but the punchline is like not working because maybe the setup's too long. Maybe you don't need all that stuff. Or conversely, maybe there's not enough information. So maybe they're missing something to get to that. So you try to work backwards sometimes. So a lot of times you'll write the punchline, but then you got to write the setup, or vice versa. So you got to like, that's why listening back is so important, because you get to see exactly when it kind of stopped, and then, or what the confusion is. And a lot of times if I'm doing new stuff, I'll like I said, I'll prep the audience, and then after the joke, I'll be like, oh, was that part like, if it didn't work, I'll ask them directly. I'll be like, so was that part not clear? And then like a lot of times some people will be like, no, that part, or that was too much, or like sometimes you do a joke and you, as comedians, we heighten everything by default. But you have to realize, like, heightening is a skill in comedy. It's a technique, but you don't want to start with the highest thing. That's too much. You have to build the audience there. So when you talk about, a punchline, that's like the funny part, and then a tag is an additional punchline off of that. But to get to that tag, the punchline needs to work. If the punchline doesn't work, the tag's not going to work. And the tag is usually one level up from the punchline. And then there's another tag is another level up. So you can't go here until you've gotten this part. So you have to understand, like, it's a puzzle. That's why it's a puzzle. It's great because it's never ending. And you could have unlimited tags on a joke, potentially. So I like to see, which tag didn't work or which punchline didn't work. And then I ask the audience, I'm like, did that not make sense because you didn't get this? Or like, what was it? And it's a fun kind of back and forth. And I get to, like, you learn how to bomb. You learn how to do poorly because you learn how to make it up for it with the next thing. And you breaking the fourth wall is fun because that's what comedy is live. You get to do that. It's not like an acting thing where you can be like in the camera, be like, oh, that was just joking, like messed up. Like, you can't do that. But in comedy, you can do that, which is great.
I love the passion that you have towards what you do, and I think it shows. As you're talking about it, it shows how passionate you are towards comedy and doing stand-up. And I think that is very essential if you actually want to be successful at something. To following up on that, I think your journey was really remarkable, going from open mics to performing with big artists, right? Roy Wood, Michelle Wolf, these are big names. How did you go from performing at open mics to performing with such known names?
So a lot of it just comes from, if you stay, grinding and doing it and consistent, these opportunities will come almost every week for almost a year. And it was a new open mic, and I went because I wanted to go to one that no one it wasn't one that a lot of people were at. I deliberately chose this one that was new because I wanted to go and be able to bomb without a lot of people knowing. And I went every week, and I would have a new 5 minutes that I would try to do. And the hosts of the mic became friends of mine because I would come every week, and they saw that I was trying. They would see that I was working, and the host had a friend who was actually an agent at an agency here in Chicago, who worked on agents work on, this was like a multimedia thing, so it was comics, musicians, magicians, all sorts of entertainment. And after about 6 months of going to this mic, that guy was like, he shot me a message. He goes, "Hey, we have a special event going to happen at the mic. It's going to be a show in the back room where the mic happens, and it's I can't tell you who it is. It's someone from the Daily Show. They're doing like a secret kind of pop-up show. Would you like to open?" And this was I was like a year, maybe a year and a half into comedy, and I said yes immediately. I don't care who it is. It's a show. It's not an open mic. So at the time, you're only doing like a few shows. Once or a few times a month, you're only doing shows versus every day or every other day. So you say yes. I get there. It's Rowan Jr. I'm a huge Daily Show fan. I grew up watching Jon Stewart, and Roy is prepping for his first special. This is when the time period was. So he's just running. He just wants like a audience to be able to run the set. And this guy and him are friends from back in the day, so that's why he got him. So you never know who you meet, and that guy made that happen. But that guy thought of me because I come there every week and I work. And he goes, I know you have like you can open really strong with he's like, just do like 7 to 8 minutes, and just open. I'm going to bring you up and just open it, and we're going to record it. It's going to be an HD recording. So at the time, getting a clip in comedy is all you tried to do. It was a big deal. Like, no one was just recording everything like they are now. So that was how you submitted to bookers. That was how you submitted to anything. So I got this sold out show in like a room probably as big as this, and 70 people in there packed in, and it was a great energy in the show. I had a really good set, and I got an HD high-end video of that, and that clip and that credit of opening for Robert Jr. kind of put me, after the album thing, that kind of put me on the map again, because I got into a bunch of comedy festivals with that. I got into a bunch of things. So that kind of moment but that came from bombing every week for 6 months at this open mic, and doing well sometimes too, but roughly just being like trying every week. And that guy's a great guy. We're still in touch. He still likes what we're doing, and he's still like a fan, but he was just a fan of what we were building. Like, he saw in me what I see in people now, where I'm like, he saw that we were producing our own shows. We're trying to make opportunities for ourselves and others, and people notice. You work hard, people notice. So sometimes in this business, you can feel like you're just working hard and no one's noticing, but fans will notice. You'll see it at shows. Like, there's so many shows I've done where half the audience doesn't know who I am. By the end of the weekend or by the end of the show, I've gained now 20, 30, 100 new fans. And I can see the shift in people before the show and after the show. And that's kind of what you have to tip your hat and like hold on to, because nothing else really matters. It comes down to that. You can do all this stuff, you can post a lot, you can do this, but until someone sees you live and sees what you can do, that's the conversion. Yeah, exactly. And at least in stand-up, yeah. And sometimes though, you do get the opportunity before they've seen you live, but that could be a referral. That could be the video, right? They see the example of you performing live. So it all still kind of boils down to your talent.
And also your connections.
Correct.
How well you're connected.
Yeah, how well you're connected, how many people are willing to say, oh yeah, this person will do well. And so now people ask me for referrals all the time. I ask other people, if there's a comedy club I want to do that I haven't done yet, and I see one of my friends has done it, I'll ask them, how did you is it an agency? Is it can you give them their email? And if they're comfortable referring me. So there's a lot of ways you can go about doing that.
Could you expand a little bit more on those ways, like you mentioned about like getting in touch with people who can help you get booked, right? Are there like agencies that you can connect with who can help you in this process?
So there's a bunch of different types of agents. There's like cruise ships have their own type of agents, because cruise ships book stand-up. But do you want to do cruises? You're gone for maybe a week to 2 weeks. You have to do a clean show, a dirty show. You have to have like 2 to 3 hours of material, which takes, if you're a stand-up, that takes probably 10 to 12 years to get that much material, and to also be able to bust it out. Like I have at this point done 4 to 5 hours of different stand up, but I wouldn't be able to tell you a joke I did 5 years ago. I'm doing the hour I'm doing now. But if you're a cruise comic, you got to be able to pull that, recall that at a moment's notice. So some of these cruise guys, a lot of them, they get billed as like, oh, they're hacks. They're just out at sea doing these shows. But a lot of these guys are incredibly good and very skilled. But that's one lane that has its own agent, that has its own thing. Then there's colleges. The colleges have NACA, this organization that basically pays for people to come. You come there, you showcase your talents. The colleges will come watch all the different types of people, all the different performers. They'll pay your agent to hire you to go perform at the college. So there's that side. But then what you want ultimately is like a normal booking agent, like someone who is a stand-up person. So once you can sell tickets and once you have enough of a following, agents will be like, okay, I want to represent you. I'll help you book this tour, and then they take that off your plate. So they book the shows. You don't have to then reach out to the bookers anymore. That's the best position to be in, because then you just get to work on your set and you just show up and do the show. But that takes like a long time to get to that point. Like, I've been approached by a couple people, but I'm like, I can do what you're doing better now. So until you want an agency that's going to take you from here to here, right? Because a lot of rooms, they're not going to even, if you just cold email, a club, they're not going to even respond unless like they know the agent who's, an agent has to go. So there's a lot of this like nuances. A lot of rooms will only use agents. It just doesn't, you just don't know. But there's different types of agents, different levels of agents. So those people will the advice I got is like, they'll find you. If you're, they'll notice you, and that's the one you want. You don't want the one that you kind of go and try to like, unless again, that could also be a referral. Maybe one of your friends is a touring comic a few levels above you, and they like their agent. They're like, hey, you should meet this guy. He's also kind of he's on the come up. So that's how a lot of that stuff happens as well. So I'm at this point now where I'm like, I'm probably, I'm doing a lot of my own, headlining a lot of my own, but I would love an agent that would take some of that off my plate.
Yeah, because it is a lot of work, and now I would like to get into the business side of the comedy. I know we briefly spoke about it off camera, but what does the business side of comedy looks like? How do comics actually make money? Because you mentioned, right, it's you're not making the same amount every month. It changes. Yeah. And there's certain months where you're making a lot more, certain months when you're making less. So that comes with how well you can plan things, how well you can plan your finances. But what are the different ways to actually make income in this day and age?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch. There's a lot of people doing it. We talk about social media. There's a lot of people who are just creating great content online, and they then get brand deals, they get ad deals out of that. I mentioned our podcast, we're sponsored by Mugsy, which is a clothing brand, so we do ads in the podcast, and then they help pay for a lot of the production costs. So there's all these ways you can kind of monetize it, but from the actual act of stand-up itself, you get paid for doing shows, for most shows, but when you start, open mics don't pay you. A lot of early shows don't pay either, but then clubs will pay you. Running your own shows can pay you. Excuse me, and also doing private events, corporate events. I do a lot of that stuff. A lot of comics don't. They just want to do the public shows, but because those take more work to set up. Liaison with a company. Having a clean set for a corporate show, you need to have the material that works for that crowd. So those but pay much better typically. And then when you start leveling up in comedy, you start commanding a higher price as well. So when you're a year in, you're not going to make the same money as 10 years in because you're just worse and you have less time. But if you're headlining, you start to make more money because you're the draw, you're the main attraction. So there's a bunch of different ways to do it. The question is, the amount is kind of tied to your level, right? So if you're a year in, how do you supplement? You're making maybe $50 on a show. You're doing one show a week. That's not enough to live, right? So that's why you don't quit your job, because you want an additional source of income. And you should keep doing that as long as you can. But then you'll slowly start to get more money, more better shows, number of shows increase. But don't just like a lot of people are like, I'm quitting, I'm doing stand up. I'm like, you need to understand there's a hard fiscal cliff. Yeah, don't just do that. Again, unless someone's like, I'm going to pay you $10,000 a month to just write jokes for me or whatever, then you can do that. But unless someone's doing that, don't just quit, because people are very confused about how money stand up works. Like, you make like this much money, and then suddenly you can go from here to like here. You can have a moment of like,
You can also go from here to here.
correct. Yeah, you can have some months where you're lower. I was like this year, which was interesting. I track all my income, all my money. Yeah, I have an Excel sheet. I do the whole thing, and I get to see, year over year. In January, what I made last year, I had made more money than January of this year, and I was worried because I was like, wait, shouldn't it be? You would think a year later, but then I made more money in Feb than I did. So it's like, it just sometimes doesn't correlate, but it's good to know. I have all the data to be like, okay, I know historically I tend to make a lot of money in the holidays because I get hired to do a lot of corporate shows. So I know that. So I can kind of now look at the data and be like, okay, I'm okay if I can make it through the summer or whatever. So I'm trying to I try to do that, but a lot of it is just like, some of you might get hired to do a gig that's like $3,000 show. That's going to make your month. You just don't know when that stuff's going to happen. You can't plan for that. But you can put yourself out there in a position to, market yourself as a versatile comedian.
Awesome. So you spoke about the fact that there could be times when you're gone for weeks or maybe a month and you're away from your family or your partner. And I know I read in the description when I was doing my research that you do a lot of content related to dating and relationships as well. So obviously it's important to have a supportive partner in this, right? But if you can just talk more about that, like the importance of having someone who is supportive, and in today's time, how easy or difficult it is to find someone who gets it.
Yeah, I mean, even when I started comedy, I was dating someone. I basically started dating someone as I started comedy. So that person got to, as I got busier and as my schedule changed, they got to kind of be along for that. So that was really cool because it wasn't like immediate, right? It was a gradual kind of progression, but they were with me. They saw me from a host to a feature to a headliner. So they kind of grew with my career. And because we had a solid foundation of, outside of comedy, and just like we worked in the same office, so I got to see them every day. And this is pre-pandemic, so before virtual and stuff. So we had a lot of FaceTime that we could build a strong foundation. So when I started getting busier and started being like, I can't hang out every day. I can only hang out 1 or 2 days a week. We had already had a strong enough. We had laid the groundwork to be able to kind of navigate that. And then past pandemic, that relationship ended, and now I'm like super busy. I'm doing comedy every day. I'm touring, but I met someone who's also a comedian who understands that because they're also doing the same thing. So that in a way is also nice because they have already the context of like, what is a show? What is an open mic? Why are you out till midnight on a Monday? Like there's all this history of like, I don't need to explain a lot of that stuff.
Because they're from the same profession, so they get it.
That has kind of and similarly, we met during the pandemic, so we also got to have a lot of time of just like, we have nothing to do. Let's hang out for 8 hours, Now we're all as busy. We're both doing a lot of projects and comedy and writing, whatever. But we would just have these long, periods of talking to each other and stuff. So that was super foundational, I think. So in a way, I got lucky both times because I had that. But having someone who understands, even if they're not in the business, that first woman I mentioned, she wasn't in the business. She didn't know. She wasn't trying to be a comic, but she was around comedy enough to kind of pick up. And then by 2-3 years in, she was savvy with it. She was like, oh, this person's an open micer. This person, she was able to tell you what was up because she was just around it so much. And it was kind of nice to have someone outside of the business to be like, what do you think about this? It's good to have a fresh perspective. And now I have the same thing, but I also have someone who's looking at it from a younger lens of I'm like asking about this, and they're like, "Well, here's how I think about it," which is also helpful because maybe my view is more old school or more traditional, but they're like, "Well, this is what people are doing now," and so I get a little bit of like that.
Both sides.
Yeah, so it's nice to have that as well, and they're super supportive, and come to a bunch of stuff, and I bring them with me to open sometimes, and and they're now headlining their own too, which is great. So it's like we've got to see both of our careers kind of rise together.
Well, that's awesome. Last question. What mindset do you think separate a comedian who makes it from the ones who just give up?
Discipline. So yeah, I just heard this. I think someone else just said it on a podcast, but it's really that simple. It's just like, are you willing to do the work? Kind of like I mentioned, things happen when people see you're doing it. Are you trying to get better? Are you trying to put yourself out there? Are you taking risks? All that comes from the discipline of like writing, performing, networking, all these things. But discipline is the first kind of tenant you need, and mindset. And for me, I wasn't an athlete, but I was in cross country, and once I did cross country, that changed my whole work ethic changed because I was forced to do this thing and do it every day and build a habit. And until that point in my life, I was kind of just like doing whatever I wanted. But now I have this thing of like, I have to do comedy. It's like in the back. It's like working out for me. It's just there. Like I'm going to do it. It doesn't matter when it gets done. So it's just like a thing in my life I do all the time. So now that I've shifted that into that kind of realm of my life, everything else just aligns itself around that. So
But genuinely tell me, like, doesn't it get difficult to have that discipline every single day? Because there's certain days when you're just not feeling it, or you went through a breakup, or you're going through something else. So on those days, how do you convince yourself to not give up?
yeah, it's hard because comedy is also very, you do bad at your job, you may mess up or make a mistake, but you're like, it's not like you're a bad person or your ideas are dumb. In comedy, if you bomb in a joke, people are looking at you like you're not funny. Your stuff is bad. So you feel personally attached to the work in a way that you don't in other fields, which is, again, good and bad. Mostly bad because you tie your value to the work, which you don't want to do that because you have to also be comfortable then if that's how you perform, because a lot of times you perform, you're in a good mood, your performance is positive, uplifting. You're in a bad mood, your performance can be a little bit more, like you're just not as like upbeat, and it can reflect. So the way to get consistent is just be able to perform in either situation, right? The longer you do it, you could tell me that something horrific happened a minute before I go on stage, and I'll still go on stage and be able to deliver a pretty good set. And then that's a compartmentalization thing, and like and a performer thing, a professional thing. But at the same time, you also need to learn when it's time to take a break, take a couple days off. Take a vacation. If you're too burnt out or too stressed, or you have anxiety, like it's okay to take a break. And that's what's cool about this job is like you can't just like not go to work for 5 days, right? But in comedy, if I'm like, hey, I know I have a really busy period coming up, I should take a couple days off. Like, I will not schedule a show, or I will try to like keep myself off for a day or so. And I'm bad about it. I was like everyday type of person. I wouldn't take any days off, but now I'm trying to be better about taking here or there like a day or two off a week, just so I can regroup. I'm still doing comedy activities. I'm still writing, listening, but I'm not like just not having to go out and do a set. Yeah. But that's a thing that's like I struggle with that a lot too, because I'm like I get the guilt of not being on stage and blah blah blah, and like I'm already thinking about today. I'm like I could go to this one thing. Like I'm already like I shouldn't, but I could if I wanted to.
And I think a lot of that also comes from the South Asian upbringing, that you have to constantly work, you have to constantly hustle if you want to be successful. So that there's also that pressure. So it's tricky because you have that mindset, but then there's also this new way of thinking and of doing things, that it's okay to take a break.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it is. It's like you're taught that you have to work hard or whatever you do, so that does translate. And that's that's not a bad thing because that did instill a lot of the discipline, but it was also now it's self-discipline because it's like, how do I structure my day? How do I do stuff and blah blah blah. And like even today, like I'm technically off of stand-up tonight, but I'm doing this.
But you're doing something.
I'm doing stuff. I'm doing other podcasts. I got other stuff to do during the day, so it's like
Well, it's not really a break.
yeah, it's never really a break, which I need to get better about, like having a day. I'm like, it's a break. It's a full break. And I'm trying to. My partner and I, she's encouraging that, which is good because I'm not someone who would like. If she wasn't there, I'd be like, I'm working every day, like, or for me, like taking a night in is like that's a break for me. Like, but she's like, no, you need to disconnect
Completely. So you can recharge and.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I learned a lot from you, and I think our audience will learn a lot from you as well when they see the episode. Once again, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure having you.
Thanks for having me. This is great. I appreciate it.